I'm sure that Sarah Woodbury here is going to correct my Welsh. This is exciting. Welcome to a very special episode of 1232. We have Sarah Woodbury with us. This is part of the Never Drop Your Sword podcast. I'm Callie Sioux, where we celebrate the creatively courageous. And this woman here definitely is one of those people. I'm so excited to talk to her. She's an author, historian, YouTuber, mother, all kinds of things. We're going to dive into her writings because she writes about whales and also our mutual connection to whales. So Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. Yes. And I almost, I almost did correct you and I refrained myself.
It's all good.
It's Creoso.
Croeso, there you go.
Yeah, the O's are like the ah and cot everywhere. So Welsh is phonetic in that sense. So it's consistent. Just have to, so anyway, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. No, it's all good. It's perfect. I did that a little bit on purpose so that we could get the expert in the room. This is great. So Sarah, please, for my listeners, just go ahead and introduce yourself, who you are, what you do, and where you are.
Okay, so my name's Sarah Woodbury. I write novels set in medieval Wales. I have written roughly 50 novels over 5 series. I've been writing since 2006, my first novel. And so that's 18 years, which I find astounding. And so I'm in my non-writer's life. I'm a mom and a grandma. I have 4 children, 2 granddaughters, a husband. We've been married almost 34 years now. And we just bought a house in Wales after coming here for so many years, so that we can have a home base and spend a little more time, since our youngest is now in college, at university, as they say here. So we brought him to Wales with us for many years, and now he doesn't get to come because he has to go to school. But we're here. We do intend to bring them all. But yeah.
Awesome. That is so cool. Thank you very much for sharing that. I am so excited to talk to you about your series. Now, we are going to get into that in just a minute, but I think that our listeners are going to find this very interesting that, Sarah, you write about medieval Wales. My sister and I, though we've been working on a particular story for several years, this is really our first time really writing about Wales as well. So we're going to talk about those connections, everybody. And I think it's going to throw us all for a loop, because Sarah and I were talking earlier before I hit the record button, and she already said several other things that I'm like, wait, you lived in Central America too? Okay, what's going on here? This is interesting. But you know what? I want to ask you, Sarah, about your artistic journey. So did you always write? Or did you pick it up just 18 years ago? What was your plan with being an author? Was that something in your heart that you wanted to do?
So when I give talks and I do talk about this, because it is interesting that there was a long period of time where being an artist was not at all anything that I was. So there's a picture of me when I was like 4, and I'm all dressed up in my rain gear. We lived in Western Washington, and I'm gonna go stomp around in the swamp, and really at that age, and then through elementary school and up through middle school, I wrote poetry and I made up songs to myself, and I did all of these artistic things, to the point that until I was 12, my parents thought I was going to be a hippie. And then, honestly, I don't know what happened. But I was also really good at school, and I became focused academically, to the point where by my late teens and 20s, I routinely said, I don't have a creative bone in my body, like believed it. I mean, I took school to its logical conclusion. I was high school valedictorian, went to college, went to grad school. I have a PhD in anthropology. And so, through that whole process, I remember talking to my sister-in-law, who also has a PhD, when I'm supposed to come up with a project that nobody has ever done before. And I'm like, I haven't had a creative thought in 12 years. Like, what are they expecting from me? But then we had children at 22 through this process. I mean, had graduated from from college, but actually, I guess I had just turned 23. And so into graduate school before we even started. And I started seeing things differently now that I had children.
Absolutely.
And with that process, as particularly with the first two, by the time they were 3 and 4 and 5, we decided to homeschool. And again, with that, one, it meant that I stayed home. I mean, I like got my PhD, but then I wrote articles and stuff for a little while. But really I was a full-time mom. And I realized we finally reached a point where if I wanted my children to be creative, I needed to rediscover that part in me. And, it began with not writing. It began with quilting, actually, because my daughter was very creative, and it was something that that we could do together. That, I can sew in a straight line, right? Stitch in a ditch.
Yeah,
Um, and then I got into gardening. We moved to Oregon, and a house that needed a lot of work, but that meant the garden was a blank slate, and started over that. And I designed the garden. Loved both with that and quilting. Discovered I loved the colors. Loved that part of the creative process.
Right.
And then in 2006, I started my first novel just to see if I could. And it wasn't actually Footsteps in Time. It wasn't my first published novel. It was really Lord of the Rings fan fiction. It's really what it was. It had elves and magic swords. And I started it on April 1st, 2006. Literally just to see if I could. Like, I needed something else. So we had 4 kids by then. And I sort of was reaching a point where I just needed something for me. It was 4 kids home all day long. Something for me, right? Homeschooling. And so the youngest was 2, and there's a big gap there. So the next oldest they're 6 years apart. So the youngest was 2, then the next was 8, and then 12 and 13. So for the older kids, I could say, like, interrupt me if you're bleeding, but otherwise no. So I wrote my first novel during my youngest son's nap.
Nice.
Like, I had an hour and a half. I sat at the kitchen counter with my laptop. I just pounded out the thing. And, to me, well, it's objectively bad.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's the thing with those first writings. A piece of advice I was given was like, okay, congratulations, you wrote your first novel. It's your baby. Print it out or whatever you want to do with it. Put it in a box and put it under your bed, and write something else. Exactly.
And I didn't know that. I mean, this is 2006, so it's not pre-internet, but it's early internet in the sense of communities and understanding that there were like writers online. Like, I didn't know there were writers online. I'm just hanging out there doing this all by myself. So I did, I listened to no advice. I had written lots of nonfiction. I obviously have a PhD dissertation that's 350 pages, but 350 pages of fiction is massively different. How to do dialogue, how to, like, beginning, middle, and end, and all those things. So I did put that aside. Because after actually not very long, I wrote it pretty quickly, and I did edit it. I did share it a little bit. And then, I don't know if you want me to segue into this, but then I had a dream.
No, there's no way. Okay.
So I'm just saying.
Hold on. No, wait. No, hold on. Hold the phone. People who know me, who listen to the show, are going to be like, wait, what? Okay. All right. Everyone, just remember that she said she had a dream. Okay, Sarah, continue. Tell us about the dream.
So backing up for Wales.
Yeah.
I went to Cambridge University for a junior year abroad. 3 friends and girlfriends and I drove around the UK didn't come home to the US, but drove around, rented a car, and ended up in Wales, and particularly Conwy.
Okay.
and I just fell in love. In Welsh, it's Nes I syrthio mewn cariad. Fell in love with Wales, with the country, the language, with everything, and just fantastic. So, but that's back in 1988. Over the years, I had started reading everything I could about the history of medieval Wales. Both my parents were historians. My dad actually told me that we had Welsh ancestry 400 years ago, like a long time ago.
A long time ago. Right.
But it was there, and then I think in the late 90s, as another homeschooling project with my daughter, we did our genealogy back when it was free, like you could just
Right.
search on the internet,
Yeah.
and discovered that the Welsh ancestry was not fictive. Like it was really there.
It was real there.
So, continuing to read, continuing to homeschool. And so, which is how come the summer of 2006, I had a dream where I drove my minivan into medieval Wales and saved the life of Llywelyn ap Griffith, the last Welsh Prince of Wales. And I woke up and I'm like, this is the story. This is the story I have to tell. It's so obvious that this is the story that I need to tell.
Yep.
And again, it didn't end up being about me, middle-aged woman. I guess I was less middle-aged then. But a family ended up being a family of Americans time traveling to 1282 in this case. But Llywelyn was lured into an ambush by the English at a place called Kilmary. And
that's fact, right? That's history.
Fact.
That's the fact.
Yes,
yeah.
That's the real history. And so I then wrote this book, which became Footsteps in Time, where I change history. So I call the series Time Travel, but it's actually alternate history, rather than actually like going back into history to change it. We're actually like alternate universe, different trajectory. So that series now has 20 novels.
Yes. Yeah.
In it. And so basically we take this family from 1282. Well, and there's a prequel called Daughter of Time about the mom. And so, but that starts in 1268. But anyway, like that is now, I think we're up to 1295, 1297. Something like that. Yeah.
Your readers will probably correct you on that. You have terrific fans.
What year are we in now?
Exactly.
Yes, so
that is beautiful. That is so neat. So you were able to really, your story is so interesting because I was homeschooled. My sister and I were homeschooled. My mom she had no degrees or anything like that. She was a very good student. She graduated early. And she had a conviction to homeschool my sister and I. So writing is everything with homeschooling, which you probably know. I don't know what curriculums you used or if you cherry picked, but my mom used Christian Liberty Academy, and so everything is just reading and writing. So my sister and I grew up both, thankfully, loving reading and writing. And that's what we just did all the time. We were both very imaginative, writing stories all the time. And I knew that my family was Scottish and Irish, and we were all very, very proud of our heritage and our history. And so I always had an affinity and loved and studied and researched Scotland and Ireland and England. And I knew about Wales, but I didn't really understand how it fit. And I didn't grow up with internet or anything, so I couldn't go research it. I had a couple of National Geographics that had some maps where I was able to find Wales. Couldn't read any of the names on the map. So honestly did no research and didn't really know much of the lore and legend, or really where many of the legends came from, which is Wales, right? But before we get too much further into that, I do want to talk about your writing process, like your lifestyle, being a homeschool mom, finding that hour and a half to write. Did your kids really figure out kind of your routine, or were you always having to adapt your routine around them?
What I generally say is as the kids grew, the time I had to work, expanded to fill the available space. So I started out 2006 with a 2-year-old, right? And that's like, I'm I put borders around the writing time. Maybe a little bit in the evening, but I'm a morning person, so generally not. It would be, when he took his nap. And then as time went on, as they grew older, especially like, so the eldest was 13 then in 2006, she ended up going off to college, like they progressed, and there was more time for me, maybe like they're working on their own things and I'm working on my thing. And we had, we had our computers together, like no computers in the bedrooms or anything. And so, our youngest would be sitting at his computer, writing an essay or whatever for me, and I'd be, working on my book, that kind of thing. And so we were right there. Actually, at one point we had one of our sons came home from when the oldest son came home from college, having graduated, just at the point that the next one in line went to college, but I still had three. So I have this line of the three, me, one son, all, working together. And so, you know, now, they're gone. And it's like I have to put borders around the writing in a way. Like I have to protect my time rather than working 15 hours a day. That's so it's sort of a different process. It's evolved as they have grown. But when my children were little, like I wrote my dissertation during Sesame Street, basically. Like it was like, this is, and particularly with the writing novels for the first 5 years, this is all pre-ebook, right? So there were no ebooks. I was looking for agents, looking for publishers. Once I got an agent. So those 5 years, it wasn't a job in the same way that it is now, right? There was no income. It sort of had, my real job was homeschooling the kids. On one hand, it didn't cost anything, I guess, and that was really the thing. As my husband and I would talk about, like, after so many years of rejection, like, should I just quit? Like, is this dumb? And he's like, you love writing. So, and it isn't costing us any, so I'm not gonna be out there going to a job. It's not stopping me from doing those things. My job is homeschooling the kids. So, do it around it is really, really what I did. But again, by the time, well, I guess so 5 years, I published as an indie author, the first book in January of 2011, which made my youngest 8, almost 8. And again, he'd have a friend over, whoo, right? Mom's on the computer.
Oh yeah,
he's got a friend over there building Legos. That kind of thing.
Exactly. That's awesome. There's so many women out there that are absolutely amazing, homeschooling their kids, balancing career, or even doing writing. My sister is one of those. Cheyenne, she is homeschooling her 2 kiddos. They're very close in age. They're wild little hellions, and we love them very much. And they're always outside playing. So she gets to get her writing time in, but she's really got to watch them because they'll get up on a horse or some kind of crazy animal and take off. And that's exactly what she and I used to do to our mom. So she's getting the comeuppance, and if I have kiddos, I probably will too.
Well, and one of the things people ask me about that, because basically I wrote in chaos, 4 kids, and they were fantastic. But I had, like I could multitask, and I could also like write for 10 minutes and switch, and then write for 10 more minutes and switch. And really what I would say is, like, if I don't do it this way, it doesn't happen at all. So those are my choices. I could not write, or I could do it where I have to like be in the moment really quickly. There lots of people talk about, oh, I need 20 minutes to like straighten my desk, and then I light a candle, and then I'm just like, I don't have time for that.
Exactly. And that, I think that's going to speak to a lot of people that listen to the show, that are a part of our little world, and your listeners and readers too, I'm sure. Is many folks are struggling with that. It's like, man, if only I could, set it up so nice and have all the music and the atmosphere, but really that that isn't what produces, not always, I guess it does produce plenty of great art, but it's not always what produces art and creativity in us. Sometimes it takes that chaos and that adversity to really get us to kind of fight for that creativity just a little bit and say, no, this is what I'm doing. I've only got a short amount of time, so best opinions, best options
Exactly.
only. I can't waste
We're going
any time.
now.
And that's the thing, is when Cheyenne and I were writing 1232, it has been a 14-year long journey writing it, because it started out as a film script based off of a dream. And then we made a short film of it in New Mexico, got all my cowboy friends to dress up like medieval knights and made the costumes, the whole thing. And then, then my sister was like, hey, I think this is actually a novel. Like, it's got so much more to it. And she had gone to school for writing and journalism. And I really leaned into her strengths of that and getting that going. And so we started writing, and literally the first several months she was off at college, we were mailing copies of our work to each other, and then we finally got USB drives, and then we were doing that. And then she got married and had kiddos and lived out on a ranch, and I was touring in a band. And so like internet was, it was just now getting good where you could do like shared Google Docs and stuff, but we were emailing each other. And so it's interesting how life's journey really shapes you as a writer. One of my favorite things about the idea of writing as a career is that it has no prejudice when it comes to age, because it is such a journey. So much of your life shapes and molds it. Sometimes you need more life experiences. Sometimes, you've got that short window of time, or it's put off for years. I mean, it took you a long time to get your first book out, from starting the writing journey, editing and working. And you are now represented by a publishing company. You now do that, right?
Well, actually, it's our publishing company.
Oh, it is. Okay, that's what I
yeah.
thought. Yes.
So I'm still an indie author in that sense. I mean, but it's a business, we're a S corp, I guess.
Yep.
And honestly, so back in 2011, where there was such a stigma against being a indie author, there sort of was like, it was my own publishing company. I was now a publisher. And so I put this in the Morgan Stanwood Publishing Group. Right. But a lot of it, there was this element where, being well, it was called self-publishing.
Yes.
Self-publishing was selling books out of the trunk of your car. And somehow, like creating this publishing house implied that there was something more than that. Exactly. Which it is more than that, at this point. Well, I mean, now it's this big thing where both my husband and I work for the publishing company. We have audiobooks, and we have paper and hardback and, ebooks, of course, and all of that. And it's just just much bigger endeavor. And I'm really glad that I started out with this. I knew nothing, like we're just making it up. And that was actually sort of one of the right things that I did way back then.
That's awesome. Yes, exactly. That's the thing. You gotta be thinking ahead just a little bit. There's those tricky things in the entertainment business where, what legitimizes what. And even now, while indie authors and self-published is not looked down upon or really frowned upon too much. In fact, big publishing companies will shop for indie authors who have a book that's done well, and then they'll pick them up, etc. It's still, there's still that fight for legitimization.
Why are indie musicians cool and indie authors not? Like, right. Seriously, like,
Yeah, exactly.
Why?
Exactly.
That's not fair.
And, why do indie filmmakers get all the grants, but indie musicians do not?
Yeah.
It just kind of goes down that chain. But you know what? That's all right. Everybody's got their boulder they got to push uphill, I guess, and that's
well, and the truth is, and maybe the indie musicians and indie filmmakers feel the same way. But I mean, the best thing that ever happened to me was to not get a traditional contract. Absolutely the best thing ever. And I'm incredibly grateful that I was rejected. My books were rejected for 5 years. Like you don't know that at the time. You
Yep.
don't know that this adversity that you're facing is actually gonna work out.
Right.
Well, and it would have been easy to quit too. And I'm not really one of those people who like, oh, you should just, keep going, like just persevere, because sometimes it is smarter to quit. Quitting's okay. But in my case, again, because I was enjoying it and it wasn't costing us anything, and it was added to our lives rather than subtracted. I just kept going until the point came where I could actually publish my own books.
That's awesome. That's great. And you've been able to turn out so many wonderful stories. And this is where we can kind of go ahead and get back into some of those fun things that we hinted at earlier. So you knew you had Welsh history and heritage in your family, or like several hundred years ago, and you actually on your website you have an incredible where you've done the research on your family's name, Woodbury, and that's really fascinating for folks who want to check out Sarah's website. There will be the link in the description below. Please do that, and her books. And that is, do you think that's really what kind of influenced your dream? Was that trip that you had back in the 80s, your research and your study? Did a lot of that kind of research come before you wrote Footsteps in Time, or?
Yeah, I think it was definitely like I read everything I could get my hands on about medieval Wales. I mean, and because I have a PhD, like research are us. So
Yes.
like I didn't know that's what I was doing in 2003 when I read some history book about medieval Wales.
Right.
But in retrospect, hey, that was great. That was a good idea because, when the time came to actually write it, I had all this background, I work very hard to make the history, well, the history's as accurate as I can make it, except when it isn't, because it's alternate history, right? But who these people are, like I have invented characters, and then I have the real characters. Who was Llywelyn ap Griffith? Who were his advisors? What events were happening in time that that would still be happening, even when I change history. Even if I essentially, like as a character, allow someone to live a little longer, maybe than they would have. There's a reason for that, because it's like in a sense, maybe the butterfly effect as well. But medicine is better because I have these 15 years on, there's been changes in the world that will allow certain things and certain bad things. I mean, it's actually interesting. Some of the latest books, particularly the latest one, I talk about unintended consequences, because one of the things that my characters bring is sort of that American optimism and democracy and freedom of speech and religion, and all the men and women are equal, these kinds of things to this medieval world. And sometimes there's consequences to change that aren't all good, maybe just for a few people, but like there are repercussions and ripple effects, and that's been interesting to explore as well. Like obviously I saved Llywelyn's life, so
Right. So
Wales is
now
different,
this-
right? Wales is different from that point on. But there's big and small,
Right.
big and small changes.
Exactly. And so had you read 1632 or anything from him before? Had you read Timeline or seen the film?
Oh, everything. I read everything. I read everything. Whether it was Outlander,
Outlander.
Timeline, 1632. 1632 is one of my all-time favorite books.
Yes.
Stephen Lawhead, he doesn't do that, but he does tons of King Arthur stuff. So I love King Arthur.
Pendragon Cycle.
And as well, like what was I gonna say? 1630 Timeline. Timeline's got a 13% approval rate. The movie, 13%
Yes.
approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. And it's like, I actually own the movie because
Me too. I
it's
love
so
the movie.
entertaining.
It is.
Yeah, you know. Oh my goodness.
I think it's terrifically entertaining. I read the book many years later. Yes, and I'm a huge Michael Crichton fan, but I had not read that book, and I read it years and years later and was just like, oh my gosh, this is the best thing. But wait a minute, it happens in New Mexico too. So just for the listeners,
Right.
Yes,
Oh,
we gotta-
right. It
we-
is in New Mexico, isn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
yeah.
we've got to address the elephant in the room. Oh my gosh, how similar are our stories? I've got a brother and sister who go back in time to medieval Wales in the year 1232. You know, we'll have to talk about a little bit about our time travel type mechanisms that we use, and alternating history just a little bit, interjecting a little bit of Americanism into medieval Wales. But I think that kind of goes hand in hand because as the stories go, which I completely believe, the Welsh have been influencing America a lot longer. In years previous, when we talk about Madog, if you want, and the different the natives in Alabama, but we'll let our listeners kind of research some of that. I came to all of the Welsh history and legend and storytelling and just richness after I already wrote the script for 1232. So what had happened was I was like you with Wales with Scotland. I loved Scotland. I read everything, ingested everything, was so into it. I had this dream about a brother and sister going back in time and dealing with kind of more, mythical, not too many historical figures, but more mythical things that I had read in different fairy tales and enchantresses and magic, and everything was Arthurian legend for me. I wrote a film called Cowboys in King Arthur's Court, absolutely taking on the Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court kind of thing and putting it Western, blah, blah, blah. And so I just had a huge passion for that. And so I really wanted to write a film script. I wrote a 90-page film script, went to my folks, I think I was 16, and I said, hey, I want to make a movie. And they're like, Callie, we can't make a 90-page, what are you talking about? How, where? And I was like, no, I really want to do it. And this was before we had all these great phones and wonderful ways to do this. This was 2007, 8 and 9 that we kind of prepped for this film. In 2009, we actually shot it. And what we did was we took the script and we chopped it down. My uncle is involved in film. He helped me chop it down into like more of a short trailer or kind of extended trailer type deal to tell the story. But what I did was, like I said, I knew nothing about Wales. I knew it existed. I knew that people were Welsh, but didn't know anything else. I knew that Avalon was probably in Wales. That's all I knew. And I did not want to place my story in Scotland in 1232 because I knew too much. I was like, well, I don't know exactly how to put my story. I'm too loyal to the history to put my story in here. So I want it to be medieval in a time period that I really love, and I want it to be in Britain. I'm just going to put it in Wales. Nobody knows anything about Wales. Nobody's who's gonna come at me, like what's gonna happen? Nobody knows anything. So like I said, I pulled down a National Geographic from my grandfather's collection, and there was a map of the United Kingdom in there, and I looked at Wales, and I picked the one town on there I could pronounce, Brecon. Great, perfect. Since the mountains, I dig it. And that is honest to God, the only research I did, period. So I used that for my script. It was a very Western style script, to be honest. Our good guys they've got their hideout out in the cave, and the castle is made of wood because it's in the middle of construction. We got this evil enchantress, the black sorceress is kind of controlling it, and we've got these rebels, and very typical, very influenced from all the action films and fantasy films that I grew up watching. So I was far more into film than I was into novel writing. I had not read Timeline. I had not read 1632. And I had seen Timeline, the movie, but I had not really investigated that further. I had read Stephen R. Lawhead, The Pendragon Cycle, and I just loved the rich history that he brought out, but I didn't quite understand how it fit into Wales. Like I said, I was so hyper-focused on Scotland that I just didn't really care. And so then we made the short film. Everyone had so much fun. We made the costumes. We did the thing. Came up with our own emblems for everybody, for the royal family that we had involved. Named the main character Cardigan, because that's another name I could pronounce.
Could pronounce.
And that was the end of the Welsh stuff. I mean, I even put a
Yeah.
Scottish priest in there. Okay.
Yeah.
And then an opportunity came for my sister and we had already written the majority of the novel, and then of course the script, we changed a lot of things changed and grew, but we kept the main characters, Rona and Flint. We kept Brecon, we kept it set in Wales, and we kept the year, and pretty much everything else changed. And then we were like, we really need to go there, and I couldn't wait to get back to Scotland. Planned a backpacking trip. We're like, we'll just go through Wales on our way. We landed in London, went to Abergavenny, which we then learned was Abergavenny. And you're good. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, say it in a Welsh for me. And we missed our train because we were like, whoa, nobody said Abergavenny. And then we learned it was Abergavenny. And then we just started backpacking through. We made it to Brecon. That's when we found out about the caverns there. We found out that the castle during that time period was made of wood, wasn't ever all the way finished. We found out that there was a resistance rebel group. I found out that there's a town called Flint, the Rhondda Valley, and just all of these things that were in my dream about Brecon, or about where the story took place, physically existed in Brecon. Even how we described the landscape, the mountains, and some of that would just be intuition and writing, but we were using it all as a plot device, and here it was in front of us, and we were just like, what? It was just crazy. So then we're like, we got to know more about this place. We got to learn a lot more history. We got to figure it out. And so we did. But your books are most definitely far more historically accurate. Mine are complete alternate universe type situations. In mine, Llewellyn dies sooner rather than later.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
well, there are two Llewellyns. Llewellyns.
Yeah. There's Llewellyn the Great, and then
who died in 1240.
Right.
Normally died in 1240, and then Llewellyn ap Griffith is his grandson.
Exactly.
And that's sort of my.
That's your Llewellyn. Yeah, exactly. And so we had to, in order to keep our story, we fixed a few things, and we tried to do a lot of different research into Brecon, and really it was going through, like many places during that time, a lot of turmoil. We had the Marcher Lords coming in. We had so there was just this nice little gap in time where there isn't a whole lot of history because a bunch of it got destroyed. And so I said, boom, this was what happened then.
Yeah, no, that's actually definitely one of those trade-offs, is that my Llewellyn, they don't even know when he was born.
Right.
He's just like, there's a general vague idea, how could they not know? I mean, they're not even totally sure who his mother was. How can they not know? Like, but so much was destroyed during the conquest. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting because now my 5th series that I started back in 2019 has 4 novels in it now, and it's set after the conquest, during the time of Edward. Nice. And Edward, I mean, the English keep records.
Yes.
They destroyed the Welsh records, fine, but they keep their own records. And so it's almost like, oh, well, there's way too much information.
Yeah. Dang it.
I know. It's like, wait a minute, I'm used to just making this stuff up. No. But yes, there is like, oh, Edward was actually, like, they know where he was at each given moment. And there's nothing like that for Llewellyn. You just, at all. Other than the fact that he was at Kilmetty when he died. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many of those little, I had to go back to different kind of historical type writings from, the 1800s, the 1700s, to really try to figure out Brecon, but it was just an agricultural spot, and there's, like you said, like the Marcher Lords came through and the different conquests and just various things that happened. There was a rebellion of some Welsh farmers against the Marcher Lords in that area, and that's how the wooden part of the castle got burned down. And then, the stone, really, it never became a major fortress. And also, with it being up there in the mountains, it wasn't 100% conquered either. Like, everyone was just kind of left to a lot of their own devices, and there was better fortresses around it, for when the Marcher Lords came and William Marshall was taken, and everybody was building castles across it. And so I was just like, all right, well, I'm just going to put it here in this little time and place. And I was able to incorporate a lot more historical things, but not too much because it didn't serve my purposes. So I would grab on various different fairy tales and folk tales. One of my favorites is, it goes by several different names, but there's a Welsh farmer who is trekking into the city always changes depending on which story you read. But he comes across an old man who has a confrontation with him just a little bit, and he tells him about King Arthur's labyrinth and the treasure that's buried underneath in these caverns. I don't know if you've heard this one. And you can recognize it by the type of tree that is planted there. You go in, you strike the golden bell, and then all of King Arthur and his knights are there, and the treasure, and King Arthur will rise again to save, Britain. Wales actually, of course.
But
Now,
at the time, yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
at the time. And so I was like, all right, King Arthur's labyrinth, okay, I can use that. There was she was called the Black Sorceress. During that time, there's another legend of how she swooped in and took over, and I was like, all right, I can use that. And so just kind of grabbed a bunch of those fun things. So 1232 has some very similar things to yours. The main characters, Rona and Flint, we ended up making them, originally they were teenagers, but we ended up making them older because we wanted to explore some more spiritual side to things and really talk about the paganism versus the Catholicism that was going on in the area. And I know that you definitely touch on that too. And ours was wanting to paint that in historical but human way. Mankind has not really changed that much. Of course, technologies, this, that, and the other thing, maybe we're in a different cycle right now to where sure women can vote, but there were other periods of time in history, especially if we study the Celts, where women held high honor. So this is just another cycle we're in, and we really wanted to take the focus from not just an action adventure and historical realm, but let's make it about the spiritual importance of people who are living a very present day-to-day life, who are dealing with life and death constantly. And let's put two people who are from modern day America who are pretty comfortable, and we make bad choices because we get to, and it doesn't offer life and death consequences so much. I mean, it does sometimes, but
But no, actually, I totally get that. I mean, so two things I would say. So I have a series called The Last Pendragon Saga, which addresses that. Like it's the pagan versus the Christian, and so so there's that whole that. But also, I was just talking to my husband the other day about how, technology that we have now, like thinking about where we are sort of in history right now, and how technology kind of it soothes us into thinking that we are better off, I guess,
Arrogance.
And if you think about like the people of that time, they maybe they didn't question their faith, but they also like were secure in it in a way, like everybody. There wasn't the same. So maybe like actually living back then would have been easier. We think about hot showers, right? That's like, where's my hot shower? But but like the constant where every single 18-year-old is supposed to like come up with the reason for the universe on his own. That wasn't happening there. Like you had a really clear way of looking at the world, and maybe we could say now that there were some flaws in it, but at the same time, it's interesting, like our assumptions about that things are so much better, and
Exactly.
in many, many ways there are, absolutely.
Yes.
But at the same time, I think that you know I felt like one of my jobs in writing books set in medieval Wales, is to translate the medieval world for a modern audience in a way that they can relate to it. I mean, I think that's like really the job of someone who writes books set in that time period, is because you need to make those people in a way. Honestly, as an anthropologist, that's the job too, except for
Yeah.
with modern people. So we would go to, you go to wherever. In our place, we lived in Belize. You go to Belize, you live with these people for a year and a half, and then you translate these cultural differences, which even if so there's language similarities, but culturally speaking, they're different. And then that's the job, is to make all people in that regard, in the same way with the Middle Ages. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, I lived in Belize too as a child. Um, so that's just funny. I mean, my family was down there. My real dad, my biological father, was working at a water buffalo ranch down there, and outside Orange Walk Town, outside the capital there. Yes, and I was quite young. I thankfully have very good memory even as a wee child, but I was only 4 at the time, so I don't have all. If I had my mom or my sister on the call, they'd both be able to correct me on a lot of this. But we lived down there for almost a year and a half, I believe, and because I had a birthday there, and different things like that. And it was a wild adventure. Turned a little sour. We ended up going back. My biological father had an interesting way of living life, and so he drug us all down there to live, and it was wild. It was wild, but we don't have to go into stories of that. But we did get to visit some of the, you know, I don't even. We went to this one temple somewhere.
Mine ruins. They're mine
Yes,
ruins.
yeah,
So
yeah,
you
yeah,
probably
yeah,
went to
exactly. Mine ruins.
You probably went to Zanantinich, which is
Probably.
the closest. It's in Belize. It's like one of the big ones in
Okay,
Belize.
yeah,
And now they were
yeah.
doing excavations. So we were in Punta Gorda, which is at like the end of the road in the south.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but at the time, I mean, I know they've excavated more since then, but we were there in 93 and 94. And Zanantinich was the real one to go to.
Okay.
You probably weren't.
I was there yes, I was. Thank you. But no, we were there in 95 and 96. So, yeah. So just there during that time. That's crazy. That's wild. I mean, I suppose I guess the world is getting smaller, but it's just so funny our different little path crossing here. That's so fascinating. I think that there's definitely a reason for that. One, that we are now friends because we proclaimed that earlier. We proclaimed our friendship earlier. And two, I think I've heard in a couple of your interviews, and I just absolutely love this. And while I was in Brecken this last year, I was doing research for book 2, which is season 3 of the audio epic, but it will be in book form. We will be releasing them as novels, but I'll get into why they're in audio in just a minute. But I was sitting in the cathedral there and going through the graveyards. I love how, on each headstone it had who was who in the village. This was a farmer, this was the cobbler, this was all these different things, and how many men and women volunteered to go and fight World War One, World War II from Brecken. And I'm absolutely overwhelmed by incredible stories and people that come from this little place, that nobody knows about. Everybody's focused on, Ireland. Ireland's fantastic. I've been to Ireland. I love Ireland. Lived there for 3 months. No qualms there. Of course I love everything Irish. Been to Scotland. Love Scotland. That's where my heart is. Of course it's popular. Of course it's amazing. Of course Outlander is doing wonderful things for it. But I was just so struck by those voices that rose out of the ground. I was like, I gotta tell the story of these people. I have got to carry on the legacy of Brecon, of these incredible men and women, and doing it in my own way. I should probably ask them how they'd like it done, but getting to talk to locals and
people are really generous, like
Yes.
here I come here and I'm this crazy American, right? Who writes 50 novels set in medieval Wales. Like, who does that? But like every day that we're here, because we're here in Carnarvon right now, I talk to somebody, whether in Welsh or English, and it's very rarely not a great interaction. Like people are generous. They're happy they don't care that I'm a crazy American, or actually they're super excited that somebody else is excited about Wales.
Exactly.
And the difference, I think, too, is that, they know how special where they live is. Like I've talked to so many people who are like, why would you want to go anywhere else? Like, seriously, why? Because this is the most beautiful place in the world. Maybe there's more sun somewhere else or whatever, but
sun's overrated.
Yeah, sun's overrated. And but then to know also that I care so much. I've learned Welsh. I'm trying to be historically accurate. I'm telling their history to an audience that is, it's not exclusively American. It's about half American now. It certainly was much more American when I first started writing, but like 2 million people know about Wales who may never, if they, before they downloaded Daughter of Time, did not know anything about Wales. And all of a sudden there's this opportunity to share what they love so much with other people through my books. And I was really nervous when I first came to Wales, because it's like, oh, I write these books and I hope you like them. But to now have so many Welsh readers who do like them, I start to feel a little more confident about that. About the plot of what I'm actually doing or trying to do.
Yes. Yeah, that is it's so daunting. Though I've gotten to travel a lot, and I do have friends and acquaintances in different places, being part of the indie artist world, you got to work with what you got a lot of times, and what you got sometimes is absolutely incredible, and you really don't realize it till you put it down. And sometimes you have to be like, well, that's not perfect, but we'll make it work, And whenever we were querying 1232 as the novel, and we got a couple of different publishers involved, I too am glad that it wasn't accepted and that it got rejected, because it did birth this whole new medium of telling the story. But people are like, oh well, it's too Christian, because you've got a priest who's always quoting scripture and talking about all of that. And I'm like, well, that's what he would have done. I mean, what else would he?
Well, that is true.
I mean,
that is true.
What other? He's not going to be quoting Joel Osteen. He's going to be quoting, Paul, for heaven's sakes.
Right.
And then, then Christian publishers are like, it's not Christian enough. One of your main characters doesn't become a Christian in the end. You've got this kind of mix of like sorcery and exorcism and and so I was, a lot of authors who write Christian speculative fiction find themselves in this in between wasteland where people are like, it doesn't really fit in a box. And thankfully the Lord comes into it and he's like, that's okay, I don't want it to, here you go. And so he didn't publish the novel, and we were like, well, maybe I could do an audio book. I do the podcast, do the music, do all this sort of stuff. And then I was like, I don't really want to do all the character voices because it's predominantly male characters in the book. While one of the main characters is Rona, she's a girl, and the Evil Enchantress, there's not a lot of girls in it. And I'd have to do a lot of male voices. Didn't feel confident in that. And then I started thinking, like, oh, I know an actor in Santa Fe who does like Shakespearean plays. He does, oh, why is it leaving me? The Welsh Christmas story that's very famous.
Oh, the Dylan
Christmas.
Thomas.
Yeah, Dylan Thomas.
A child's Christmas in Wales.
Yes, A Child's Christmas in Wales.
Yeah.
He does a lot of Dylan Thomas. Like, he knows how to do stuff like this. And then next thing you know, I was sitting there with my husband, and I'll say it's my husband's idea, not mine. We all of a sudden had a full cast of people that I knew who were professionals, who had wanted to do it before, or could help me with it. And that's how the audio epic was born. Full narration like an audiobook, full dramatization, and the immersive sound, and of course being able to write the music. And then I was actually able, you'll find this fun, for the second season, I wrote a song that all my resistance fighters sing, the night before the battle. And, because there's plenty of old Irish songs, and there are a lot of Welsh songs, but it's, so many of them are in Welsh, and I'm like, I don't know how to translate. So I wanted to just go ahead and write something that really fit the story. So we wrote a song, and I was like, man, I would love to get this in Welsh to include, with the written story and all this stuff. And my Airbnb host that I stayed with in Brecon, she had put in her profile to speak Welsh. I'm like, I'm really trying to learn, and I actually have this song that I'd really like to get translated into Welsh. Do you know anyone who could do it? And she's like, oh, well, my husband would like to take a look at it. He could do it. And I said, oh, great. It's awesome. So I emailed it to him. And a few weeks later, before I came and stayed, let me see if I can find this real quick. He translated it for me, and I was like, okay, thank you so much. And he's like, and I went ahead and translated into the proper Welsh that was spoken in that time.
Oh my gosh, what is he, like a historian or something?
Even crazier, and his name is escaping me because I'm so excited about it. So give me just 1 second. I'm going to find it in my email here. I was so elated. His name is Graham Davies, and he, after he did that, I was like, man, who is this person? How did this even happen? And he is winner of the Wales Arts Council Book of the Year.
Oh, wow.
Yes, he is a historian. He speaks and writes in, Welsh of the 11th and 12th century and earlier. And he has won a ton of awards. He's a sought-after lyricist for composers who are either doing it in Welsh or in English or anything for classical works. Like, he's a bigwig. And I had no idea. There's this
You're just like, oh yes, please translate this thing for me.
Yeah, exactly. And I just couldn't believe it. And he's like, I went ahead and included different words and translations that harken back to other like wartime songs written in that time. So if anybody who knows knows their history can read that song and be like, oh, that's just like such and such ballad, And I was absolutely,
that's amazing,
gobsmacked by that. So it's amazing what will happen when you reach out and ask. Just like with you, I was so intimidated to talk to you because I'm like, our stories are too similar, and she's gonna think I copied her, and she's never gonna talk to me. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen. And then I finally was like, okay, I'm sending this email, and he responded so quickly, which was amazing. So I really appreciate that. That is
well, I think it's a big enough pond, let's just say.
Yeah.
And honestly, because I do care so much about Wales and I want to share that, I think you reach an audience that I don't reach, and within with the podcast and with,
Exactly.
with I have connections over here and you have connections over here, like this Graham Davies person, like,
I know.
that's astounding. Like, where did that come from? So,
yeah. Well, that's a huge part of, how my spiritual life plays into what I write and what I do and I produce is my relationship with Jesus Christ. And, you know, like you were saying earlier, it was far more common for people to talk about God or talk about that, or it was just part of the vernacular, Godspeed, and that we lose sight of that when it comes to talking about back then, all the during the dark ages, during all this kind of stuff. People want to think that they were just backwards, superstitious, crazy people when really, like you said earlier, no, that part of their life, the spiritual belief part, was kind of the most consistent thing.
Right. Well,
It's just a word
and
about it.
honestly, in Wales, so Wales was conquered by Rome, right? 410 they march away, but they converted to Christianity in three under Constantine. And so when they walked away, Christianity was one of the things they left. So some of the first Christians outside of, you know, whatever, Italy or
Yeah.
were Welsh of all things.
Mhm.
And so like we love visiting all the little churches and holy wells and these kinds of
Mhm.
things named for the saints. So the 5th and 6th century, which is really early, is the age of saints in Wales. And
St.
and that's
Patrick.
where right. Well, and St. Patrick was Welsh, obviously, yeah.
Mhm.
And but like I mean, there's a zillion of them. And like you can go to one of our favorite places to visit is a place called now I of course now I can't remember Shangalenen. It's called Shangalenen, but Galenin is the name of the saint. And it's that church is built in the 11th century and over the top of a much older one. It's got a little holy healing well. Um and it's up above Conwy. And you go there and you're just like, well, what people have worshipped here for thousands of years. I mean, probably actually for many of these places, the the thing that happened in Wales is that the church was not structured. So so um as there was it was sort of really this fluid feeling of from moving from paganism to Christianity. And there would be a holy person like Kalennin, and people would gather and they would listen to him, and then they'd build a little church, and then they'd have this little healing well, and those places became little towns would grow up next to them. And so in Welsh, Shan, like everything's Shan, Shan Bera, Shan Shan Galenin, Shan Vaglin, Shan, and Shan means church enclosure, like holy enclosure. And it's like there's 1,000 place names in Wales that begin with Shan. And it's just like that history, if you think about where just like the words you use on the landscape, and everyone is saying Shan all the time, Llan is how it's pronounced, meaning holy place, holy locate, like where we live is Llangalenin, Llan Rockwin, Llan, and so on. Anyway, I think about one of the things that with that process is like that really, really old Christianity that is rooted in the history of Wales. I think people don't know. Like they don't know St. Patrick was Welsh, right? That he was actually a missionary to Ireland. And maybe they'll get that part, but not like that he was born in South
Yeah,
Wales,
exactly.
and and that sort of that process was really organic in a way that I think was maybe less the case in some other places. As it moved among the people. And
Well, they even have a story, a telling of Merlin, where Merlin was baptized and became a Christian.
well, the whole King Arthur, I mean,
Mhm.
that is a 5th century. I mean, the Battle of Mountbatten is
Mhm.
500, right?
Yep.
Roughly. And and so much of that story is a conflict, but it's a spiritual conflict between the Christian Welsh, who
Mhm.
weren't Welsh yet, but the Britons,
Mhm.
and the Saxons, who were pagan.
Yeah.
And that was that we have letters that the Britons wrote to Constantinople, which had become the center of Christianity,
Mhm.
begging the Romans to return to protect them from these pagans who were coming in and taking over. And they're like, you were your brothers and sisters, and you've left us. And they're like, Sorry.
Sorry, can't
Fend
make
for
it. Yeah,
yourself.
we're
Sorry.
we're also
You're
getting
good.
sacked by pagans over here.
Yes,
So
that's right. So,
yeah,
but I mean, like over and over and over again, we have, my husband and I have a talk that we give about the history of, the multi-thousand-year history of Britain. And very often that's what it is. It's like, the Romans come, everyone sort of becomes Christian with a blend of paganism that sort of goes on. But by the time the Saxons come, everyone's Christian, many anyway are Christian. And then, um, and then the Saxons convert to Christianity and the Danes come and they're pagan. And then
yes,
so then you have a whole island that's Christian except for the Danes who are taking over, and they take over half of England. And
yeah,
everyone's like, whoa, come help us. And then, it's like wave after wave after wave of where there's then these, the people then convert to Christianity finally once they settle. And yeah, and I think it's a whole way of looking at um people's, thinking about like the people lived during that time. Like they had real lives that's not just like on the screen, where they went from day to day to day to day. And as you said, their connection to life and death was closer, so much closer than we who protect ourselves from it. I mean, whether it's because we live so long, honestly. Like,
right.
there's, until your grandparents die, maybe you don't really know. You might not know anyone who's died or had anyone close to you who died. Whereas back then it's like,
Yeah,
brothers,
yeah.
sisters, aunts,
Sister,
uncles,
yes,
it's a constant thing. And I think that also made people more focused on like, what's the point? Like,
right. What
that there's more than this, and that's okay. And we're going to live whatever we have here to the fullest because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But at the same time, we're all sort of all in this together. There's this huge sense of community. There's a whole sense of spiritual community
yeah.
that I think that it's harder to find, definitely in this modern.
And exactly, and that's the thing that we love exploring, and in the first installment here of this story in season 1 and 2 of 1232 is that American idea of religion and church and Christianity and all that crap that has with it, and goes back to this slightly more pure form, though far more complex, because you're dealing with uh, limited amounts of scripture available. You're dealing with, other old traditions that are hearkening towards worship, and then you've got the physical struggle. But there's so many fun things that finally people are debunking about medieval life. Like there was no color, it was always gray, it was always muddy.
I
And while it
know.
was gray and
They
it
didn't
was
comb their
muddy,
hair.
yeah, yeah,
Like they show
and brush
these
their
movies
teeth.
and people are like, and it's like, no, they bathed.
Yes.
Actually, they did all the time. Actually, the in London, there's a area that's called the Stews, but that was called that because that's what the Roman baths were. And then in the 10th century, they send the boys running through the streets. The water's hot. Come
Yeah,
take a bath. And it's
yeah,
like people bathed.
yes,
They drank water.
yes.
They weren't short. I
And
one of my most popular
yes.
post on one of my most popular posts on my website is how tall people were
Mm-hmm.
in like the Middle Ages or whatever. And particularly in Wales, because again, Wales was not didn't have cities. It was agricultural, but it was herding. So sheep and cattle and
Mm-hmm.
goats. And so they had a high protein diet, lots of dairy, lots of meat. And they've dug up graves, and basically the average height of a man was 5'10" to 6 feet
Yeah,
back in that era. And then people started getting shorter as they moved into cities and their diet
the diet, exactly.
deteriorated.
Well, it's,
So
yeah,
the low was like height of men was like 5'6" during the start of the Industrial Revolution, and it took like 300 years for them to recover
recover.
to
Exactly.
a pre and like in Wales, they were full-grown people.
I know, yeah, exactly. They weren't just little. And I love how people are like, oh no, they have to be short because all the doorways are short. And it's like, no, that's to keep the heat in, you guys. I mean, come on, you know. And also, if you got somebody who doesn't know your house and they bonk their head or they go up the stairs and trip, you know, you got somebody who's not supposed to be there, or
Well, they also have like postern gates. So
yes,
like you'll have a big gate and then you'll have this little short door.
Mhm.
And it was so you could just open that. A horse can't go through it. You can't attack through it. You have to step over a big threshold and you have to duck.
Yes,
right?
yeah,
And
exactly.
it's like that's not how tall they were.
Yeah, exactly.
They were 4 feet tall.
They were, yeah, I know. And then, you know, the peasant's meal is, you know, they didn't have time to grind their wheat or, you know, mill it down to being white. So they had brown bread, you know, it's like brown bread and salmon and vegetables is, you know, that's like a $40 meal somewhere.
I know, exactly.
But for peasants, that was an everyday thing, you know, and the more wealthy wanted the more arduously made white bread.
But good for you.
You know, that's And, you know, it's just so funny, and I love that we're able to debunk so much of that. I love that there's more authors spending time in the color that so many castles were painted, and that so many.
I know. Yeah. So
That's
there's Trim in Ireland, Trim Castle,
Mhm.
where we went to visit at one point, and it was like completely whitewashed white. Not now, but like in the past. And you look at it now and everything's gray. And it's like, because the stone is gray, right?
Yeah,
It's just because stone is gray.
Yeah.
It was whitewashed and then painted.
Mhm.
All sorts of colors. Actually, if you were to go to, have you been to St. Fagans, which is the National Museum of Wales? It's near Cardiff.
No, I haven't been to.
It's a sort of a living, it's an exhibit, you know, that's
Mhm.
outdoors, and they have, anyway, they've rebuilt a Shees, which is Llewellyn's palace that was in
Cool.
North Wales, and they've rebuilt it at St. Fagans. And you walk inside and it's got red, and I mean, like painted, all the walls they're whitewashed, but then they're painted as well.
Yes.
And you think, oh, right.
Yeah.
They liked color. They did
Yes.
like color,
Yeah.
and it's not all gray.
Well,
And
people are people, you know. Women are going to want to redecorate their home or in their space. Like that's just, or men too, and you're going to want to express yourself. It's not like people weren't expressing themselves, and then all of the terrific tales and stories and singing and oral traditions and all of it was so much more lively than people give it credit for. And so I love that, you know, through your stories and through your research, especially your videos, I love how you've gone through and you've gone to many of these holy places, you've gone to these castles, you teach us how to say them, and you give us those history. I know that you're shifting gears with your videos, but there's listeners, there is 5 years of terrific videos on Wales. You get to walk through it with Sarah and her husband. I highly encourage you to subscribe to her channel on YouTube, where you'll also be able to watch our interview and go learn some Welsh from somebody who knows how hard it is to to do it. And it's really fun because, you know, there really isn't enough Welsh content on YouTube, whether it's speaking or history or whatnot. We've got a few canned things, a few BBC things, but really what you guys got to do, I think, is just beautiful, and I love that.
oh,
So
well,
thank you for those videos.
That's lovely. Yeah, it's 5 years. You know, I mean, that was some real soul searching going on to decide to like, okay, we need to step back. 5 years of weekly, like we did a video every week for 5 years.
That's amazing. I can
Yeah.
hardly do a video a week for a year.
Yeah. Well, you know, and it's not like we planned it, right? You know, it just sort of it built on time, and then it's like, well, and my husband's a taskmaster. Let me just say, he was like, we have a video coming out. We need to do it.
Good for
Write
him.
something. Yes. But really, you know, we did it because we've been to all these places and we wanted to share them and give people, you know, it's so much more fun to go to where it was like Shanvaglan, which is near Carnarvon, and say, hey, like here's a 9th century gravestone that they've built into the church. I mean, how cool is that? And it's cool to look at, but it's even cooler to be able to share it with somebody. And so that was really a lot of the driving force behind a lot of the videos we did. I mean, in the first year we did more of a telling a story, you know, like we started with the Celts and we sort of had this story going on, and then we did religion the second year, And then sort of made more like one-off, like we visited these places and so on. But all of it was in the idea of like sharing what we knew beyond the books, right? And I love sharing the books,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
there's just so much more there that people wanted to delve in a little bit more.
Absolutely, absolutely. And speaking of books, you have a new one coming out March 29th, and that is going to be available everywhere you get your books. Is it also going to be dropping as an audio book on the 29th? Or is that
Not
wait?
on the 29th.
Okay.
Not on the 29th. Just it takes too long. They take so much longer to make audiobooks and I have to finish them. It's been done for nearly a month now, and my narrator has it, but it's coming. So, but there'll be on the 29th we'll have ebook, paperback, and hardback.
Excellent.
And it's for pre-order now. And so this is the 16th book in the
Yep.
Garrison Gwen Medieval Mysteries,
Mysteries.
which
Yes. Yeah.
yes, and which actually take place The Good Night is the first book. It's actually free in ebook. And it's set in 1143, which
Okay.
I just have to call back to Mad Dog.
Yes.
Because when I first started researching the Gareth and Gwen medieval mystery set in 1143, during the reign of Owain Gwynedd,
Mhm.
I was skeptical about Mad Dog. I mean, I'd read all the stuff and all the
Right.
books about it, but like, oh, really? Some
Yeah.
Welsh, everybody wants to have discovered America, like,
Yeah.
but then when I learned, and this is a huge spoiler for the series, so I apologize for that, but in 1170, when he was supposed to have set sail, was the year Owain Gwynedd died, and Madog was one of his sons. And Owain Gwynedd had like 17 sons or 25 or however, an enormous number of sons, okay?
Yeah.
And two of the two youngest conspired to murder all their brothers. And so there was this general warfare, um, foisted upon the other, say 17,
Mhm.
by these younger two, and Mad Dog was one of them. So instead of fighting, he sailed for America. And on top of which, they all have they're all related to the Irish and all the Danes who settled in Dublin and Iceland and Newfoundland. So everybody knew about America.
Yeah.
In
Exactly.
1170, everybody knew. They didn't call it America, but they knew
Right.
about the Viking settlements or the Danish
The Danish.
settlements
Yeah.
in Newfoundland. And so to me, it was like, oh, like that's actually reasonable now that he would
Right.
have said, I'm going off with my cousins,
We're
don't
gonna
worry about
figure this out.
me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do my own
I'm no
thing. I don't
trouble.
need to fight you. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gone. So anyway, so my books were up to 1150
Okay.
now, from 1143 to 1150, and this is the 16th book in the series about that family.
That's fun. I think listeners, 1232 episode, well, I don't know exactly when this will drop, but you would have just received an episode. We have 31 in season 1. This is a really fun long tail. And if you just don't want good books, good stories to end, Sarah Woodbury has 50. I mean, you've got book 16 coming out in a series. You've got 20 in another, and this is exactly the content you're looking for, people. These are exactly the series and books you're looking for when you're wanting to just ingest and binge read to your heart's content. So definitely please check out. Sarah Woodbury has been my guest for this special bonus episode where we have talked a lot about Wales. There's so much more. I feel like we barely scratched the surface on your experience there, your writing, but I really appreciate the different things we've been able to cover, your process, your lifestyle as an artist and a mom, and how your husband and you got to work together, kind of build your own publishing house, and now we're being able to be in Wales. This is 18 years of extreme hard work, and what a beautiful season you're at right now. Who knows what the next
Yeah.
18's got for you, though?
I don't know, but looking forward to it.
Exactly. So I've got just a couple more questions for you here, and one of them is, what's the one thing that keeps you going, that has kept you going? The rejections, the homeschooling, the chaos. What's the one thing that's kept you going?
Yeah, so the first 5 years aside, in a sense, before I started publishing, but honestly, it's the community that has arisen sort of out of out of the writing. And we were just saying today, so I have a Facebook author page, but we have a book club that you have to ask to join. It's private in that sense, but there's like 1,200 people in it, so it's not like that private. But to join where people talk about whales and the books and their kids and cats and this kind of thing, and it's just such a sweet thing. And through that, I have met so many lovely people who they love my books, but there also has been a way to connect someone in Germany with someone I went to high school with. That's like this community of people who just really in like the same things I like, that a way to have this lovely little haven on the internet. And the book club aside, it's like every single day I get emails from readers. Every single day I get to be part of a community that I never would have even, how would I even have done that without writing the books? And I'm just so grateful for those connections. I mean, here I am in Wales. And how did I get here? I'm good friends with a lovely young 87-year-old woman who's fluent in Welsh,
Right.
who knows me because she read my books. And then we reached out, we had a meetup or whatever. And now, I spent 3 hours with her yesterday talking in Welsh. And how did I get so lucky?
Right.
It's just those kinds of things that, whereas, if sales are down, if I have 1-star reviews, it's like, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter in the long run when as long as I can bring joy and be a service to a whole bunch of other people. And that's one of the things too, because I get email from people who they're getting chemo, and they're listening to my books. I give away free audiobooks to anybody who's having medical issues, because it's like, you have to have chemo, listen to Daughter of Time. That's just so much better. And to know that, someone's mother died and they wanted to use a passage from one of my books at the funeral. I was like, how could I be more honored than that?
Yeah, that's
So
That's beautiful. Exactly. Those personal connections and being able to impact people in that way as a storyteller. Yeah, that is definitely a beautiful thing to keep you going. And one last question for you, Sarah. And we want to thank you again for being on the show. And folks, I'm going to have all the links to Sarah's audiobooks, her ebooks, her new release, her website, her YouTube in the description below. Please go follow her. I think you're going to want to. I feel like you did a wonderful sales pitch on your books and stories. So I don't think I have to do much for you, but I really appreciate you taking the time, and we'll have all that info for you guys. And of course, check out 1232, which is nothing like Footsteps in Time, but at the same time, it is very
exactly like it.
exactly like it. Now I've got to start, really digging into that series. I've stayed away from Sarah's series there on that one because I'm like, I can't have it influence me. But now I'm going to get to dig in, and we'll get to compare some notes. If you get to listen to 1232, I'm very nervous and intimidated, but if you do enjoy the alternate history to your alternate history. But here's the final question, and it's kind of a strange one, but I want to get your opinion on the state of writing and books today. So, what's the one thing in the book world that we aren't talking about but really should be?
Well, I think that there's two worlds now in the book world, the traditional world and the indie world. And what's unfortunate is that I think the traditional world barely knows we exist, but at the same time, I think that the indie world is the world that's most creative. Like, it's not corporate, right? Because we're all hanging out here all by ourselves. I also think that it's one of, I know so many people making a living as a writer who are indie authors. And I know very few people who are traditional published authors who are making a living as an author. And I think that's because they're getting, they just get so much less out of that traditional world. And and to me, I think that there's um, a way to, there ought to be a better way to talk to each other than currently we have. Now I'm the involved in an organization called Novelists Inc., NINC, which is an organization for authors who have multiple books published. There's an income threshold, and through that, as involved in membership, I like see contracts and stuff that cross my desk, and and it's just like it's not about the money per se, but I think that it's important when you start writing novels is to really be clear about what your goals are. Is your goal to be, Stephen King? Like we all want to be Stephen King. I mean, don't we? Really? I mean, seriously. But at the same time, it's like, are you writing just because you have a story to tell that you just can't not tell? I think that was in a way the case, initially for me and for you. It's like you have to tell the story. This is, this is sort of, but then like where do you go from there? Is this a career? Is this going to be a career or is this a one-off? And I think that it's like being a writer is something that everybody does individually, but at the same time, it's something that we all. It's like we experience it together individually. I don't know. And I wish that there was a way that there was to really have authors really trust each other a little bit more. I mean, I think indie authors do, but the way these two worlds are separated, I think, is unfortunate. And I'd like to see fewer NDAs and more ability for authors to really connect with each other, because I think that is actually a whole nother community, which I have also been incredibly grateful for, that I didn't know exist when I started out, but does exist, and most authors we're all hanging out here typing away on our laptops, by ourselves. And sometimes it's just really great to know that there's other people out there who have similar experiences. So, that's a very publishing world. That's a very nitty gritty kind of answer.
I like it though. That's great. I think that holds a lot of relevance today, especially as the world just kind of wants to keep us on those islands. Whether it's through screens, opinions, all the craziness that's going on with everyone everywhere. And I think that as storytellers, it is absolutely our duty to come together, continue the traditions, make the king laugh, accuse the king of treachery.
Yes, it's right.
And
like it's all the job.
Exactly. It's be the bards that we were born to be. And I really love that you and I get to connect with that we have this incredible, almost spiritual, but mystical connection with Wales. And I just think that it's a beautiful place. Highly encourage people to look into it and to visit it when they can, and to treat the locals with respect and love, because that's exactly what they do for you. So
yeah, absolutely.
Well, Sarah, gosh, this was awesome. I could talk to you all day, so I better stop. Now, but thank you for coming on. We so appreciate it, folks. Thank you for listening to 1232 and the special episode for the Never Drop Your Sword podcast. And we will see you again. Make sure you tune in for new 1232 episodes every Wednesday, and stay courageous.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.